Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for more slop. We are not taking our foot off the throat of PlayStation anytime soon as they continue to murder video game culture. Yeah, we're not going to mince words, dude. Like, they're killing it. And so one thing I was interested about was how the industry was responding to it. We talked about that. But also, I found it interesting to see that Shawn Layden, one of the former PlayStation bosses, like the dude who was on the stage with the PS4, a generation we all remember fondly. Remember that generation where like PlayStation was leaning into used games heavily? You don't remember? Let me grab you a clip. Let me grab you a great clip here. Here's Jack Tretton during the PS4 generation talking about your beloved used games and why they're important. Take a listen.
When a gamer buys a PS4 disc, they have the rights to use that copy of the game. They can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever. When a gamer buys...
Look at all those cameras. Look at it. Listen to the cheers of the audience, like the happiness they created. And this is what won them that generation. That right there, that move, they know the importance. And Shawn Layden was there for that. So I was very interested to get his thoughts on this. Did PlayStation, consider this very early? What does an ex-PlayStation boss think about this general trajectory for the business? For those who don't know, like he's been very vocal about how things have progressed from economics. He's talked about game development budgets and how it's been unsustainable with game prices and that they've always gone up. He's talked about Game Pass and how he thinks it's foolish. So what does he think about PlayStation going away from discs? Let's take a read from this article here on Eurogamer. We're going to go through the whole thing. Former PlayStation Worldwide Studios leader and Sony veteran of 32 years, Shawn Layden has described Sony's surprise decision to end game production of discs as fairly dramatic. In an interview with me, he called it a spreadsheet decision, outlined why he didn't think secondhand sales were a deciding factor in it, and explained why Sony has always wrestled with this exact decision in the past. Layden left Sony in 2019, and it's important to note before I begin that he had no insider or prior knowledge of the events that have taken place this week. He said, quote, "I have no idea what was going to happen. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I don't work in the business anymore. Maybe it's just too prohibitively expensive to stamp out discs." Essentially, his guess is as good as ours. So we're not following his gospel, but I do think it's really important to consider 32 years working at PlayStation, was the head of one of their most important generations in the PS4. What he says matters here. He's seen the sheets. He's been a part of conversations, and he does bring up that information, like conversations he's had about physical games and the thoughts inside the building and how often this has been pushed for, which will disappoint you, I think. He said it could be no more complicated than some people looking at a spreadsheet and deciding the number doesn't make sense to keep supporting physical sales anymore. Quote, "If you look at any decision to discontinue a product or feature or model or what have you, largely it's a straight spreadsheet decision. What are disc sales compared to digital sales? And I am old enough to remember when digital sales were like 10%. I'm old enough to remember when digital sales were 0% because we didn't have a digital market. And that number just grew over time. And obviously we know this, the article mentions it as well, but like COVID really accelerated things. AI, I think, has accelerated things a little bit. Where just like, I'm talking about on the company side when it comes to AI, where they're just trying to cost cut it any direction they can, and digital storefronts benefit them far more than having a retail middleman here. You say, like us, Layden thinks that Sony's decision to end disc production means that a PS6 console won't have a disc drive. It's a move he said Sony toyed with for years while he was there. Quote, "I've been asked this question every year for the last 20 years. When are you guys going to give up on the disc drive? My feeling with that was always, well, when I get to a place where I'm comfortable enough to believe that worldwide broadband throughput is good enough to support that download experience, good enough to reach the majority of customers. Majority does not mean entirety," he clarified. "So there is a tipping point, where if I have 80% of the opportunity, which represents 95% of the revenue source, what's the incentive to keep the lights on for the other 20% if it's effectively 5% of the business?" Do you see what I'm saying? At some point, it becomes obvious that we can't keep this whole thing running just for this small slice of opportunity here. So major takeaway for me here is simply that they've been talking about this for a while. He says every year for the last 20 years, when can you get rid of the disc? And even if that's an exaggeration, it's every year for the last decade, right? When he was there. So that goes back from 2009 to 2019. Crazy. And I'm sure this question would continue for him as he would consult further. So this has been something that these companies have wanted so badly. so that they can cut out the middleman, control the price, and make gaming an even more expensive hobby. Having secondhand markets is important because being able to afford games is important. Not everyone grows up with a silver spoon in their mouth or even just additional income. Sometimes used games and trade credit is all you get as a kid until you can start making your own money and then spending it on games, and you have that agency. But for a lot of people, that's not an option. They say presumably that tipping point has been reached, but there's always been a danger of overestimating regional internet infrastructure somewhere, something that Sony has always been, quote, pretty good, end quote, at considering in the past, but, quote, unlike Xbox, Sony has a wider global fan base, and not just in numbers, but the reach, because Sony has reach all over the world. But there are people who fall outside the internet's reach. For example, there were people on military bases playing PS4 who had no internet connection for security reasons. And, quote, the idea was that you could still buy a PS4 game, throw it in a machine, and play was important. You don't want to leave those people behind, Layden said. I don't know what went into those conversations, he summarized, but it's a fairly dramatic decision. There we go, making Emmett's job difficult again. It's so interesting hearing the military base thing here, because time, it's a flat circle. Here we go again. Here we go again. Remember when this is brought up? Who are we talking to again? Oh, that's right. Don Matrick. Don Matrick. We have a console for you. You want to play offline on your military base? We have a console for you. It's called the Xbox 360. And so Jeff Keighley challenged him on that, saying, oh, so for those who, don't want to buy the Xbox One, just go get a 360. And Don Matrick immediately tries to walk it back. Here we are talking again about parts of the world that cannot access their video games and how they're still part of the broader customer base, and how, well, you got a PS4 at the end of the day. That was important. Not so much now. Continuing on, Layden says here that secondhand sales aren't such a big thing anymore. Even when he left Sony in 2019, their effect on the business was dwindling. By the time I had left, maybe we had some people looking into it and physical piracy, that kind of stuff. We used to do a lot. We had a lot of energy 20 years ago. You used to see photos that we put out bulldozers going over pirate discs in Hong Kong, crushing them. That concern is gone now. They used to be a huge factor, he acknowledged. The whole GameStop business model was driven around the used game. And then over time, the rise of digital kind of quashed that used game business and made it hard for folks who were already making a nickel in the secondary market by selling them. I don't really think the reality is that it necessarily drives this decision, because this has been happening over time. I think right now we've reached some kind of homeostasis where it's in a weird sort of balance. Secondhand gaming still occurs, obviously, but it's not material anymore to the business to worry about, I think. While specific tipping for Sony's recent decision remains unclear, Sony's provocatively cited consumer preferences as the reason for discontinuing disc support. The ramifications of it are a little clearer. What I want to focus on here is the secondhand market and how he says for a while this has not really been impactful. And that is a big takeaway, because I think it plays into both arguments. One of my arguments is like secondhand gaming matters because it makes things affordable. And a lot of people have said, well, that they're going for that market. They don't want to lose that money there. If it's not something to worry about, and it hasn't been since 2019 where digital gaming was still growing, then is this really the point of their decision? I think you could still argue so, because it seems like every nickel and dime matters right now. It's why we're going in on AI. We're trying to cut down staff, because we're trying to use these tools together to improve a single person to take over the role of like maybe 3 to 5 people. And on top of that, you've got things like this, like, okay, how much money do we save when we're not printing, producing, shipping stuff? Probably a lot, in the many of millions. And so that all adds up to them, and then they can put that right in their pocket. So it's very interesting to get Shawn Layden's perspective again, because now we learn 2 things here. One, this was a thing building for a while, and not just because, oh, people are buying more digital, but like this is something going back 20 years. And on top of that, we also have an idea now that PlayStation never really felt quite threatened by the secondhand market. So what does that tell me? It's actually a simple answer. Greed. I really do believe this is an Occam razor moment. Like, this is just that simple. Simplest answer, most likely. Greed. It's just that simple. They are currently unchallenged. Nintendo's going off and doing their thing. You have Xbox who's shooting themselves in the head 4 times over every year. There's no one that Xbox PlayStation war meant something. It was their one direct competitor in that same space that they fought for the same audience, the same type of audience. Yes, we're in an attention economy now, but they fought for the same audience. And having one of them so colossally fuck themselves all generation has led to this. in a lot of ways. It's not purely Xbox's fault because PlayStation certainly hasn't had a great generation. But Xbox having no games in 2022, for example, at least PlayStation can say, we didn't do that. We've had some awful decisions this generation, but we didn't do that. Point being, though, is this is what happens when they're left unchecked and they know they can make more money and they're ready to start bodying you right into a type of practice that benefits them, and none of the benefits of that move get passed on to you. You don't get more back compat. You don't get your PS3 Vita games. You don't get cheaper games. Certainly, PlayStation employees will keep their jobs now, right? Because you're able to save more money. Certainly, you'll be able to keep these longer development timelines, right? And projects that should have seen the light of day won't get shut down, right? Right? Wrong. It's not happening. Nothing's changing. They're just making more money off of it. Now, on top of this, PlayStation has had a response to all of what's going on here. This is a new announcement. They write here, PlayStation confirms support for existing physical games post-2028. In a new announcement, PlayStation has stated that publishers can still get existing physical media printed after January 2028. According to a new GameFile report, Sony sent a partner message to game publishers stating that they will, quote, still be able to place reorders for existing PlayStation discs, end quote. PlayStation has clearly informed partners that any game released before the deadline will be able to have its discs printed. However, PlayStation did say that one thing will change. The ordering process for discs will be announced later. Regarding what happens after the deadline, Sony stated that publishers will have the opportunity to release new games at retail using digital codes. Fuck you, bro. It sounds fucking awful. Okay, so players now know how they will be able to grab discs of games released in 2027, in 2028. However, we don't know how these games will be offered later. Will it be code embedded in a card or something else? Players will have to wait for an announcement to know for sure. So they're trying their best to damage control internally. The pressure is getting real, so keep it up. That's all I've got to say on that. Keep up the pressure, dude. But this, like, okay, we can still get some discs afterwards. This is something I was talking about recently. But we know this has been a long time coming. Sony's wanted for a while. We know that they're not maybe threatened by the used game market. So again, I just see it as greed. Killer, bro. It's just killer. So continue to fight. That's all I can say on that.